Good morning, everyone. This will be part 2 of lesson 1. So for those of you who watched the first set of notes, you should have been able to fill in half of that guided note sheet, and then with these slides and these notes, you should be able to complete the second half of those guided notes. So last time we ended with Hamilton's legacy, so now we are going to jump into Jay's Treaty. So what was Jay's Treaty? So John Jay was sent to England to negotiate. Well, what was he going to negotiate? To stop seizing U.S. ships. So even though the United States, well, who weren't quite the United States yet, but even though the colonists, the Patriots, defeated the British in the Revolutionary War, there was still tension between the two. So Britain was still seizing U.S. ships that were off sailing in the Atlantic Ocean, so John Jay wanted that to stop, and America wanted that to stop. They wanted England to vacate the forts on the frontier. There were still some British who were still in the colonies in America who were still at forts. And the colonists and the Patriots and the Americans now were like, you guys need to leave. We already defeated you in the Revolutionary War. Please vacate. And they also wanted repayment for stolen crops and slaves. The British did not necessarily go very kindly once they were defeated in the Revolutionary War, so the colonists wanted repayment for some of those items that were taken. And they wanted a treaty on commerce in the West Indies. Again, the West Indies being down southeast of Florida, like the Bahamas, Jamaica, etc. Again, where there's a lot of sugar cane being traded and produced. They wanted some commerce and to make some profit on that as well. However, Jay returns with only 2 of these met, and this treaty is met with outrage, but Washington simply has to accept it because, of course, George Washington wanted all 4 of those items to be taken care of, but only 2 were met, and Washington's like, well, at least we got half of them met. The Whiskey Rebellion. What was the Whiskey Rebellion? Hamilton, he pops up again, everybody. Alexander Hamilton. He's just written all over our history books. In 1791, there was an excise tax on whiskey, and this angered frontier farmers because the frontier farmers were producing the whiskey, and they thought this was an unfair tax on their whiskey. They did not like that because, of course, if your stuff is getting taxed, that's less money that you're making for a profit. So in the summer of 1794, a revolt breaks out in western Pennsylvania over this tax on whiskey. And Washington calls on his army to go and suppress this rebellion. And this sets an example of federal law, authority, and follow-through. So this is important because citizens of America learned that, hey, we cannot rebel against our government without some type of retaliation. So this set an example of that and showed the people that our government was going to police certain situations, so you cannot just rebel and not face any type of consequences for it. Pinkneys Treaty. What was Pinkneys Treaty? All right, you can see a map here in the, would this be turquoise, teal? I'm not a color expert here. But this area was claimed by Spain after 1793. And then we're going to see the line of Pinkneys Treaty here. So what was Pinkneys Treaty? So this has established intentions of friendship between the United States and Spain. Spain still owned Florida at this time. So even though we had the original 13 states, Florida, of course, was not one of those original 13 states. That was still owned by the Spanish. So this defined America's western boundaries and guarantees American rights to the Mississippi River. The colonists, they wanted use of the Mississippi River here because, again, if they're transporting goods along the Mississippi River, it's a very convenient source of travel for goods. Again, back in this time period, there's not any type of simple way to transport things over land that doesn't take a lot of time, so using water was a very necessary and convenient way to transport goods. So this defines that western boundary and guaranteed Americans the right to utilize that Mississippi River. John Adams' presidency. So John Adams will follow George Washington. He'll become the second president. He was the vice president under George Washington. And, well, what happened during Adams' presidency? Well, the French were plundering American ships and had broken off diplomatic relations. As you'll remember, the French fought alongside America in the Revolutionary War. Well, now they're having some negative relationship issues here by the French plundering their ships. Adams restores relations with France, but runs into issues with the XYZ affair. What is the XYZ affair? Without going into a lot of details, there was issues with diplomatic relations going back and forth again during this time period between France and America. If you really are interested, you can Google it and look up what the XYZ affair was, but we don't need to go into too much details on that. So there was a quasi-war, there was an undeclared naval war, And this results from that affair because now America is in a naval battle with France. But that'll eventually be restored, and no super horrible issues come from that. Moving on with John Adams' presidency, there was an ideological war between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Again, Federalists were in favor of more government involvement. Anti-Federalists wanted more state power and less government involvement. And those Anti-Federalists are going to be the Republicans. The Revolutionary War generation was splintering into two sides. So yes, we had won the Revolutionary War. Woohoo! However, now that we're a new country, there's still a division in America and in our government system about what and how we're going to run our country. That's all I have on that. I was just kind of laughing at this picture here. Okay, moving on. The Alien and Sedition Acts, I briefly talked about this, I think, at the end of the last unit. So what was this? Alien Acts, what did they do? They empowered the president to deport, quote, dangerous aliens at his discretion. No, we're not talking aliens from outer space. Aliens refers to individuals who are not American or who are not from our original 13 states. And if they were deemed dangerous, they could be deported without any questions, which seems a little unconstitutional, but I digress. The Sedition Acts criminalized making false statements that were critical of the government. So if you were trying to utilize your free speech and you were talking out against the government, you could get criminalized and thrown in jail for doing those things. This was seen by the Republicans as measures against freedom of speech, again, freedom of speech being our First Amendment in our Constitution. Opposition to these acts, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison led outspoken anger against these acts. They thought it was unconstitutional. So what did they come up with? The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which declared the acts as alarming infractions on constitutional rights. And this anger led to Jefferson's defeat of Adams in 1800. So Thomas Jefferson utilized this anger and this idea of, hey, you are breaking people's constitutional rights. This momentum helped Thomas Jefferson defeat John Adams in 1800, which, of course, makes Thomas Jefferson our third president of the United States.